Hey YouTube, this is Rob L, and today I'm coming at you with a video where I'm going to be comparing and contrasting 4 different guitars, all single cuts. Starting on the right, it's a Les Paul Custom Shop with chrome hardware. To the left of that is a Les Paul Custom Shop 1960 VOS plain top. The next guitar is a Slash Epiphone limited edition plus top, and then the guitar on the left is a PRS 245 single cut. So just to be clear, this is not a review video. I'm not reviewing these guitars, and I'm not going to do any sound samples on this video. And the reason is that by the time you hear the sound samples on YouTube, which is highly compressed, you're not really hearing what the guitars sound like, in your home or in a live situation. I can probably take any 2 guitars with humbuckers and through bias effects make them sound pretty similar and pretty awesome. That's not knocking bias effects, that's just the nature of the beast. Just something worth mentioning, obviously the Epiphone being 1/4 or 1/5 the price of the other guitars, it's not going to come with the same quality hardware as the Gibsons or the PRS. For example, within about a month of me getting the Epiphone Slash, the 3-way toggle switch broke, so I actually replaced it with a Switchcraft switch. I've never had a problem since then. And as far as the pots, the volume and tone pots, I haven't looked inside the guitar at those, but I'm sure they're probably cheap Chinese-made pots, but I've had no issues with them. They don't make any noise. They're not scratchy. As far as the tuners on the Epiphone, they do rattle a little bit when you play the guitar, but they're actually pretty good and they keep tuned, so I'm just going to keep them. So starting with the Gibsons, I've owned several Gibsons over the years, including a Les Paul Studio and an Explorer. They were both excellent guitars, and I only sold them to buy other gear, and I actually kind of regret that now. As far as this VOS and the custom shop that I have, the fit and finish is excellent. There are no flaws in the finish. The binding is excellent. I think where Gibson gets kind of a bad rap sometimes is, for example, because they do have binding, the way that works is the plastic is put on the edges of the guitar, and then the guitar is painted and they're hand scraped. And because of that, because there's so much hand work involved, that you're never going to get it perfect. And I think a lot of people are a little bit unrealistic. And I understand if you pay $5,000 for anything, you want it to be perfect. But these really are, after they're CNC cut, they really are handmade instruments. And I will compare that to the Epiphone. The Epiphone actually does have some finishing flaws, but the Gibsons are really perfect. And I'll try to show you some close-ups of the paint and the binding. They do have some wear on them because I've used them a bit. Ironically, the Epiphone finish is probably perfect because it's a polyurethane finish, whereas the Gibsons and the PRS are actually nitrocellulose. So they are a little bit more susceptible to dings and wear. So with the Epiphone, for example, if you look at the neck joint here, you can see that it looks like what happened was there was a little bit of overspray at the factory, and then what they did was they maybe tried to fix it up a bit, and it looks like it's cracked, but that's just in the polyurethane finish, that's not in the wood. And then if you look over here, and this is actually pretty funny, it looks like what happened was as the guitar was drying, somebody at the factory must have grabbed it, and moved it or whatever. It looks like there were actually a couple of fingerprints, which I think is pretty funny and makes the guitar unique, so I don't have a problem with it. As far as the PRS, the fit and finish is absolutely flawless, which is what they're known for, and it's just a really beautifully made guitar. Now, as far as comparing Gibson to PRS, and I've owned a bunch of Gibsons over the years, like I said, and I had another PRS at one point. It was a CE24, which I regret selling. The way I see it is that the average stock off-the-shelf PRS is probably about as good as a Gibson custom shop. So in other words, in order to get PRS off-the-shelf quality, I think you have to buy a Gibson custom shop. Okay, so as far as playability, and this is kind of a subjective thing, all these guitars are great players. They all sound great. Again, they all have American-made pickups, especially the Slash, which actually can really nail his tone. But as far as the playability, the necks are all different. The 1960 VOS has a very thin neck. The Gibson custom shop, the Slash, and the PRS actually all have bigger necks, which I find comfortable, but for example, I may not recommend it for a student or a kid. All these guitars come with really high quality cases, even the Epiphone, as you can see here. All 3 guitars are made of mahogany with maple caps. Now the custom shop one, I don't know how many pieces of wood that is, but I know that it's mahogany with a maple cap. The 1960 VOS is mahogany with a maple cap. But the Slash Epiphone, and I'll show you, I'm not sure if you can see it here, It looks like it's 3 pieces of mahogany in the back. And then on the back, there's actually a veneer to make it look like one piece. And the top is actually a really nice flame maple veneer. The heaviest guitar here is actually the 1960 VOS because it's not weight relieved. The lightest is the Slash guitar, and I would say that the Gibson Custom Shop and then the PRS are somewhere in the same territory. They're actually lighter than they look. Each of these guitars has a different playability and a vibe, and what I mean by that is, for example, when you pick up the PRS, it's really smooth. It's hard to explain. There's something that's really smooth about it, and the way the pickups react, and the way they feed back, and the way it responds to your playing. And same thing for all the other guitars. The Epiphone, it's hard to explain. You can tell that it doesn't have quite the same feel as the Gibsons. And I think part of it is 2 things there. Part of it is that, as you can see here, the frets are not finished in the same way. They don't have the plastic nubs over them. So it's a little bit of a different feel, but also the Epiphone is a polyurethane finish, whereas the Gibsons and the PRS are nitrocellulose, which is a different feel. I think a little bit of a smoother feel. Again, it might be a preference thing. I just think that you can tell the difference between the Epiphone and the Gibsons and the PRS. But again, for the money, if I was playing in a bar band, I would probably take my Epiphone because I wouldn't worry as much about it getting knocked over and damaged, but I know that I could still rely on it to sound great and be a great player. One other comparison between the Gibsons and the Epiphone, and this is just like a pet peeve of mine, and if I was running Gibson, I would probably do this just to combat the chipson market. I would probably change the Epiphone headstock and make it more like the 1960 VOS headstock over here, and for a couple reasons. Number one, with the PRS, for example, if you buy a PRS SC import, it has the same headstock. Fender does the same thing. If you buy a Squire Fender, it's the same headstock as an American-made Fender. As far as the Epiphone headstock, it's just an aesthetic thing. I just hate it. Again, it doesn't affect the performance, but I think if Gibson wants to combat the chipson market, I think that would go a long way. I think people would maybe consider buying an Epiphone instead of going online to all these sites and buying the chipsons. Okay guys, that's it. Just some quick thoughts on Gibson versus Epiphone versus PRS. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my channel, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon. See ya.